So the starting point for developing the MMPI-3 was the MMPI-2RF, and we began with some preliminary investigations designed to answer some questions we had about the test and about potential changes for the MMPI-3. The first of these had to do with the response format. Traditionally, the MMPI has employed a true-false response format. Other tests use gradated Likert scale type response formats, 3 or 4 point response formats. So the first thing we did was to create a different version of the answer sheet and instructions with a gradated response format, collect some data with that revised version as well as the existing version, along with collateral measures that would allow us to examine the validity of scales scored with the traditional true-false versus the gradated response format. And what we found was that using a gradated response format did not improve the validity of our scores. And so in order to maintain continuity with the test and the research tradition of the instrument, we decided to keep the true-false response format for the MMPI-3. The next thing we did was to look at the possibility of simplifying some of the items of the MMPI-2RF. Although some of that work had been done in the transition from the original MMPI to the MMPI-2, we very carefully went through and looked at the items of the MMPI-2RF and identified a total of 43 of those items that we chose to simplify in order to make them read more easily and flow more readily as the test taker is going through the test booklet. And so those changes were made. We collected some data to make sure that that didn't alter the psychometric features of the scales, and indeed that's what we found, that the 43 rewritten items maintained their psychometric functioning, and that allowed us to move on then to the final preliminary study in which we began looking at expanding the item composition of the test. And we had some targets in mind. We knew that we wanted to develop items having to do with eating disorders, items having to do with grandiosity, with compulsive behavior, with impulsive behavior, additional items having to do with anxiety-related experiences. We went through systematically and reviewed the literature and identified some targets, and through an iterative process in which we again collected some preliminary data to test out these items, we wound up with a total of 95 trial items that were incorporated into the data collection for developing the MMPI-3.